Hello, everybody watching at home. Really happy and delighted to be able to host this webinar today on the high press, opposition analysis through the lens of a WSL manager in Tanya Oxtoby at Bristol City Women. I'm Amy Price. I'm Women's National Coach Developer for the Southwest. I'm joined by Mick Matthews, FA Youth Coach Developer, and Laura Seth, who's the Education Performance Analysis Lead at the FA. So the aim really of today's webinar, we're going to have a slightly different approach towards how we would like to structure this. So really we're looking at the build up to Bristol City, looking to play Reading, and we would like to hear from Tanya in terms of what she sees in Reading's high press. So she will be talking about how she would analyse Reading's high press. We'll then go on to hear from Tanya in terms of how she might prepare her players to take on this information and to be able to ultimately have the best chance of executing this game plan. So, Tanya, talk us through your background in football in general. I know you had a playing career and obviously you're now a manager. So talk us through that for us, please.
Yeah, I've had a very sort of transient, if you like, playing career, and now obviously as a manager. And I grew up in a really small country town in WA in Australia. So to end up over at Bristol's a very strange journey. I played at Perth Glory. I was captain there for 4 years. Played all my youth football throughout, all the Perth age groups, and ended up being the first sort of Indigenous captain really in the W League, and something I was really proud of. I ended up over here playing at Doncaster Bells actually, which, I was coming towards the end of my career. I wanted to try something different. So I came across, I played a season there. Definitely thought it was time for me to end my playing career. I probably got an extra 2 years out of myself that I probably robbed an extra 2 years out of my playing career. And throughout that whole time that I played, I was always coaching. I was always really interested in coaching. I thought it really helped me as a player, to be honest. So I was never the quickest. I was never the most technical. So to be able to read the game and understand the game, like I said, probably got me a little bit of extra time as a player. So I was coaching at Nottingham Forest while I was playing for Doncaster. Obviously, at that point, it was a summer league, and the Forest League was a winter league, so it allowed me to do both. And then once I finished playing, I sort of transitioned across, and I ended up at Notts County as their director of development, and I really enjoyed that, working with the youth system and bringing the players through. And I ended up going back to Perth after that point as the assistant coach. Probably a bit of a dream. Obviously, Perth everyone has that one club that's really close to their heart, and Perth's obviously that for me. And I went back there. I worked with the Young Matildas, which is the under-20s Australian team at the same time. So got back in the sunshine, got to play, coach in the W League, which I played in for a long period of time. And, we ended up sort of doing really well that season with Perth. So that time came to an end because we did so well. The men's club sort of bought the license and sort of took it over and brought their own coaches in. So ended up back at Notts County after that point. And I think we'll probably leave that there in terms of how that ended. Part of that sort of really difficult time where the club ceased to exist very quickly. So from that point, took a little bit of a break. I coached at the University of Nottingham, really enjoyed that. Again, looking at, younger players and developing them, and, just getting back to what you love. I think after an experience like that with Notts County, it's important that you remember why you coach and why you do what you do. I wanted a positive experience, and that was probably perfect for me at that point in time. Mark Skinner then was, wanting me to come across to Birmingham, and that was, again, something that I just wanted to be in a really positive environment. So went across and worked with him, had a great time there. And after that, ended up at Bristol. So, yeah, very adventurous, if you like, career. And hopefully many more kind of different places to explore and different opportunities before I finish my coaching journey.
Aspirations for the future, just real quickly.
Yeah, I think for me it's about making sure whatever the next challenge is for me, it gives me an opportunity to continue to grow. I'd love to coach Champions League football. I'd love to, eventually be an international manager, maybe when I get a little bit older. So there's certainly those aspirations, but I think in football you have to appreciate what you've got when you've got it. So for me, I'm just obviously focused right now on Bristol.
Good stuff.
Okay, I think thanks, Tanya. I think that sort of comment there at the end of like that your coaching journey and continuing to grow, I think will resonate really with the coaches that are on currently on or about to begin the A licence qualification. So I just wanted them to sort of look at this model, really, this principles of play model, which will be strongly utilised on the course of training. And it's basically a bit of a questioning framework to explore how teams choose to solve the problems of the game. So obviously, as we look at the model, there's a counter principle at play. So for instance, on transition, if a team are looking to penetrate, create space quickly with that movement as support, and as we look at this particular sort of block of work we're looking at is then which individuals are looking to press, are they able to press, do they press to delay or try and regain the ball? As units of players, are they trying to provide some cover and balance and sort of retain some compactness? So as we just look at the video in a second, it's important, I think, that we just look through the eyes of this particular model, which is what they'll become familiar with as the course progresses. So if you can just press the play, Laura, and we'll just have a look at the footage. So again, that was just a recap, really. And again, just to recap, that's the framework, the questioning framework we're going to use. I think as a coach, when you're watching either your own teams playing or sort of televised games, live matches, which particular individuals are linked to some of these principles on the right-hand side of the model. You're looking at units of players both vertically and laterally, and then how does that impact on the team's sort of strategies and game plans? So again, that's just a bit of a recap, just to familiarise yourself with that model.
Okay, so Tanya, you've obviously seen there the video around the FA principles of play, which is, as Mick said, a really good framework to question and to look at the logic of how football's played. But you probably also have some team principles that you utilise at Bristol. So talk us through how important they are, and in particular your out of possession ones, so we can link this into the high press.
Yeah, I've had I've been really lucky. I've come through sort of two, the FA system and system at home. So I've had a little bit of a mixture of influence in kind of creating our principles, really. So when we're looking at Bristol, I was a defender, so the poor girls get hammered all the time about our out of defence, out of possession stuff. So, when we're talking about our principles, we have 6 of them, and it's really, really important when you're delivering, when you're reviewing, even when you're analysing opposition, that you're always using, for me anyway, we've got a young group, so making sure we're always using the same language within those principles so the players can relate back to it. I think that's really important. So, when we're talking about a high press, we use our language with that and our principles. So, with us, we've got press, 1v1 detail, compact, and patience and discipline is another key one for us. And when you've got a young group that want to go gung-ho and try and win the ball back all the time, it's really important that you start to get them to think about maybe not the first line winning it, the second line winning it, things like that. But the language for me is really important. When we're coaching, when we're delivering on or off the pitch, the language has to be the same, and always referring back to your principles. I'm always hammering the girls and asking them why we're doing things as well. I think that's really important. Female players like to know the why, especially the younger ones. So, it's something that we ask them all the time. Why have I asked you to shape the press like that? Why have I asked you to press there? So they can start to develop that understanding. But if you don't use the right language, they can't relate it back to your principles. So that's really important.
Yeah, I think that just, again, thanks, Tanya. Again, I think just for the benefit of the coaches observing, those team principles, which again they'll be exposed to some England national team principles, really is generating a style of play, how you want to play the game, which again I think complements that principles of play model that we've just alluded to. So I think that's important around that language, as you've mentioned, and certainly promotes a certain style of play, I think, incorporated within your strategies and your tactics.
Okay, so the high press, really interesting to get your views on this, Tanya, in terms of the time you've spent abroad, the time you've spent in England at different clubs. Why do you think that teams in the women's game, particularly in the Women's Super League and internationally, why are teams using the high press?
Yeah, I think for me, from my perspective, it's just my opinion, but I think there's 2 things, two key factors that have really influenced the high press, and the trend of that is, one, that more teams are playing out from the back. So more teams are looking to build through the thirds, and therefore there's more opportunity to win the ball back with the high press. But also, you look at the WSL now, I think, the more that there's increased professionalism across the women's game, you're looking at things like the physical side of the game. It takes a lot to be able to high press and then counter press and maintain that. And the more that standards are increasing across the women's game in terms of that professionalism, the more the physical aspects of the game are increasing, the capacity of the players is increasing, the more capability they have to do that. For me, high pressing is about controlling something that's out of your control and being able to set traps. So, if you know that there's more teams that are going to be willing to play out and try and build through the thirds, well, actually, if you've got the capability to go and try and win the ball back higher, that's always going to be your first sort of preference, I guess.
Yeah, and I guess we'll get into it later, but when we talk about Reading women and how aggressive they are in their press and how high they squeeze, obviously there's space in behind, and as you were saying there around the women's game, it's only just finished its 2nd year of being full-time professional, and obviously this season wasn't a complete or a normal season. So in that, like, players' ability, I guess, the capability of those players in the defensive third to be able to, with pace, with power, with purpose, to be able to go in beyond the press. Maybe it's not quite as consistent from players that we at the moment in the women's game. So that could be like another reason why a team like Reading will press in the way they do.
Yeah, and it comes back to your analysis of the team you're playing, doesn't it? If they've got a player in their side that can hit, a 30, 40 yard diag, then that's going to adjust the way that you set yourself up and what you're looking to do. And if you know that actually you're playing a team that doesn't have that in their locker, that, and you are a team that likes to high press, then actually that's going to affect kind of that compactness and how much you want to sort of step on. So yeah, it's about doing your research and knowing kind of, who you're playing against and what weaponry they've got, really.
Yeah. Love it. Thank you.
Cool. So I'm just going to talk through and evoke a little bit of discussion around some analysis from this season's Women's Super League, in particular, putting a focus on the high press. I think it's a good point to start with, that this doesn't, I guess the data gives us an indication of which teams are applying a high press, and will lead us a little bit to understanding sort of their effectiveness within that. And I think that will become more apparent as I talk through some of the data. So in this instance, we're going to look at a couple of metrics. I can move the slide on, it will be really good. There we go. We're going to look, if you look at the graph on front of you, on the left-hand side of that graphic, as you look at it, we've got a metric called passes per defensive action. So that's essentially the number of passes a team will allow their opponent before they have a defensive action. So the lower the number in this metric, the more it suggests that teams have an intent to press. So, for example, the opponents are building the attack. They might play out from the goalkeeper to the centre-back, the full-back, back to the centre-back. That will be 3 passes. And then if a team is pressing and has defensive action in there, that will be a passes per defensive action of 3. Along the bottom then is ball recoveries in the attacking half. So the number of times a team wins the ball back in the attacking half of the pitch. Both numbers on the 2 axes refer to per game data. So these are numbers per game. And the dash line up the centre and then horizontally across the screen are the WSL averages for this season. So my next button press will bring dots that represent the badges of the teams and where they fall within these 2 measures. So I guess, Tanya, looking at the top right-hand quadrant, these will be teams that show some intent to press and also have a higher than average ball recovery rate in the attacking half. Which teams from the Super League this season would you expect maybe to fall in the top right of that quadrant?
Yeah, I mean, Reading will be in there. Chelsea, Arsenal, Man City, I would imagine, possibly Man United as well. Okay, there we go.
You know your team pretty well. I mean, we've obviously alluded to the fact, in the conversations we've had so far, and with the introduction to the webinar, in terms of that Reading are really effective in this area. So, they have a pass per defensive action of just below 6 per game. So, really, the team in the WSL this season that show the highest intent to press the ball when the opponent has it in their defensive half of the pitch. And also Chelsea on this graphic are the team that win the ball back most frequently. So teams that were 4 sort of in the top right, that graphic was suggesting show an intent to press and are pretty effective within that. And if the teams don't fall in that quadrant, it doesn't mean that they're ineffective in the high press. It will just give us an indication that that's not necessarily a tactical strategy that they apply. So again, Tanya, I'll throw it back out to you in terms of what you're doing with your players at Bristol City. Where would you expect to be in the graphic here in place of your tactical strategies?
Yeah, I think, we'll be in that bottom left quadrant. It's certainly not, looking at from this season, looking at the injuries that we've had, the inability to rotate players in our squad, the physical strain that places, and also the attributes of the players that we've got available and their strengths and how we want to exploit. I would imagine we'd probably be in that bottom left quadrant, because we don't, it's not a game strategy to go and press high.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. If I just bring these badges back on, you'll see clearly, they're quite down the bottom left of the quadrant. And like I say, this is not data that's trying to pick teams that are good or bad. It's just trying to give us an idea and a steer to which teams are trying to be, or trying to show more intent within the high press phase of the pitch. And I guess a caveat that data doesn't tell us absolutely everything. What this now does, it gives us a steer to maybe go and look at some of these teams in a little bit more detail, and that's what we're going to do in the case of Reading in this example. They're a team that very much outperform their league position in the league and show a particular, or based on the data, show a particular strength in this area of the pitch and particular intent to press the ball in this area of the pitch. So What we're going to do, Tanya, is we're going to take you back a little bit to sort of October, November time from the season just gone. So in the latter part of October, you were playing Spurs, and at the same time, Reading were playing Manchester United. There was then the international break, and then Reading was your next fixture. So we're going to have a look at some examples of Reading in the high press from their fixture against Manchester United. Before we delve into that, can you just maybe give us a little bit of an overview in terms of the process you apply when you are profiling your opponents, and maybe what in particular are you looking at relative to sort of your game model?
Yeah, this one was an interesting one, actually. I think whenever we look at opposition, we look at least their last 3 games. That's really important. And if all those 3 games are very similar, and then Bristol's a beast in itself, really. So teams don't necessarily always play the same way against us as they might do against one of the top sort of 2 or 3 sides. So if there's not a side that's in and around us in those 3 fixtures, we'll always go back and have a look at somebody in and around that, just so we can get an idea if there's any shape change or any trends that change. And again, when we're analysing from our perspective, we do it using our principles. That's really important, because we break it down into exactly as we would want to present to the players. So we're using the same language, same areas of the pitch. All of that sort of stuff's really important so that they can relate. For example, if we're looking at how Reading high press, we're then looking at how we're building from the back. So that's really important that we try and match that up so that there's some correlation there for the players and some clarity.
Well, so just as you're looking at that sort of process, Tanya, then, and you mentioned really around your sort of tactical strategy, your utilisation of your players and those principles you mentioned of how you want to play the game. In relation to Reading, then, what was your sort of thoughts around the potential problems they may sort of cause you?
Yeah, their strengths definitely probably would expose our areas that we weren't strong in, which was the main concern. So when we're looking at sort of our patterns of play and how we want to build, given the players that we didn't have available due to injury, we had to rethink that a little bit and sort of, it's one of those things, you've got a way that you want to play and there's a way you have to play. They're completely, and you need to, it's that shifts on a scale at times, and you need to be able to adapt and adjust. So for us, we didn't particularly want to play into their press because they're a lot bigger, they're a lot stronger. Our midfield is quite young and inexperienced, and we've had a load of players who are going to probably be playing out of position anyway. So we wanted to try and keep it as simple as we could and try and avoid getting caught in, what is essentially their strength, which is to press you high. And even if you get through the first bit, if you give the ball away, they're going to counter press you again. And we just didn't really want to create that problem for ourselves.
Yeah, because again, I guess that tactical deployment, their change of a system, I mean, it subtly went from, I think it was a previous of a 1-4 diamond 2 to sort of a 1-4-2-3-1. Not only the capabilities of players, but you're taking into consideration that tactical deployment of the players within it, I guess, as well.
Yeah, and I think the strength of Reading is that they are very disciplined in what they do. So even when the shape is tweaked a little bit, you can see what they're still trying to do. So it's just really, really important that you are, you're switched on and that you yourself are disciplined in what you're doing. You believe in what you're doing and getting the players to believe in that. And that comes back to the analysis and making sure that, they understand your principles, but they also understand the opposition's strengths.
Yeah. Good, yeah.
Just a quick one for me there, Tanya. Could you predict or could you kind of anticipate what Reading's out of possession team principles could be? Because you have played them a few times, haven't you? You've been managing in this league for 2 years, and then you're in the league before that as well. So
yeah, look, they're super aggressive. They back themselves. They'll release themselves off players. So they've got balance and cover generally behind the ball. They're very narrow in their press as well, which is the reason they're so effective with their counter press, because they've got numbers around the ball. For me, they're compact. They're really aggressive in their 1v1 defending. They're not afraid to release themselves and jump press, if you like. And generally speaking, they get the balance and cover right as well. So, if I was looking at it purely from a principles point of view, that would be a couple that I'd tick off for them.
Cool. Okay, so I think we're going to look at some videos, video clips. So Laura, you're gonna set us up with the first one.
Here we go.
Talk us through what you're seeing here, Tanya.
Yeah, so as you can see, Reading they've got their distances right there from the setup. You know, they're covering a fair bit of the pitch, and they're anticipating that ball. And once it goes longer, they swarm and they win the ball back. So you can see here they've got 3 up top. So they've gone. I'll just pause it there. So they've got a really good spread across the pitch there. You know, and they're. You can just see they're anticipating and they're ready for that. Wherever that first ball goes, they know what their roles and responsibilities are going to be, and that can be really, really difficult. Obviously, they're quite happy to go 1-for-1 at the back as well, you know, so they're willing to sort of release players forward to try and win it. So I'll just sort of let it play through. You can see now as it sort of travels out this side, the first thought of the Reading players is to get across to that side of the pitch and narrow themselves off and stay connected.
Even when the goalkeeper was and the centre back were taking the kick, like you could see the front three like a sprint start, like ready to pounce straight away. You know? Yeah,
they're very clever at look, one of their strengths is their mental kind of you know, their game management and their ability to get in your head. They are generally a very experienced squad. So things like getting themselves in a race position to go, that is that we call that perceived pressure. They're giving perceived pressure without even having to really do anything. And that can be, you know, when you've got a young squad, which is what we've got, that can be quite intimidating. So again, going back to kind of, you know, what we were looking to do, we probably didn't want to put ourselves in that position. Because they're very, very good at it, you know, and they all seem to know what their job is. Once one goes, the rest all follow.
So is this the reason why? So you spoke about like the front three being really aggressive, like them narrowing off and their mentality towards pressing. Is that a reason why you, or did that inform how you were going to approach goal kicks when you were going to play against them?
Yeah, I mean, we had a bit of a nightmare, to be honest. Obviously, like Laura mentioned earlier, it was an international break before this game. So we got the players back quite late. We then, because they were back so late, we were trying to get a load of work in. So the day before the game, where, you know, Reading are also very good at set pieces. So we were trying to work through some of that. And we ended up actually having 2 players clash heads. So one of whom is our centre half, you know, and she's really important to what we do. And then she ended up having to be withdrawn at the services actually on the way to the game. So again, you're reshuffling. And when you've got a young group, it's about making sure that it's simple for them and really, really clear. And given how effective Reading are at pressing from the front, it just, for us, when you've got a goalkeeper like Sophie Bagley, who can actually hit the third line quite easily, we probably just didn't really want to encourage that, really. You know, from our perspective, we wanted to go over the press and release it as quickly as possible and then look to sort of build after that.
Brilliant. We're going to move on to the next clip now. What are you seeing here, Tanya, when you look at Reading?
Yeah, I mean, look at how narrow they are. You know, that's their fullback, I think, on the edge of the circle there. So, you know, you look at how high they are, how pressed forward they are, and how narrow they are. And it basically gives them the opportunity to counter press constantly and continually win the ball back. You know, Man U are no slouches when it comes to in possession, and they're really struggling to be able to find a way out there. And the ball just continually seems to come back to Reading. And I think from my perspective, that's a massive strength for Reading. But it's also something we identified that we wanted to sort of to utilise. I'll just pause it here. If you have a look at the Man United player who's just sort of floating there in the middle of your screen, we spoke a lot around when we win it, especially in tight areas, you're going to feel quite suffocated. So actually trying to get the ball out as quickly as we can to the opposite side, and the passing, the detail on the pass doesn't have to be great. Just get it out of that space and get it into an area where then we can face forward and look to breathe and kind of get some calm on the ball, if you like. But if you see in this clip, you know, Reading don't give Man United a chance to breathe. They're kind of right on top of them the whole time.
Sorry, can I jump in there, Amy? Again, I think that's a clever, you know, that deployment of that player that just is out of the picture there, Tanya, as you mentioned, around an outlet. And I guess it also puts an element of doubt in the Reading sort of press, you know, certainly from the fullback.
Yeah.
And again, I suppose once you've regained the ball in that tight situation, it allows an element of scope, really, with like, as you mentioned, it doesn't have to be a great pass out there. But that's that deployment of that player out as we see in the picture there, it just provides that outlet, doesn't it, as you mentioned?
Yeah, and the reference point is obviously for that player. For us, obviously, it's a winger. You know, be in a position where that fullback cannot arrive on first touch. So wherever the pass goes, make sure the distance is big enough that they can't arrive on your first touch, so that then you've got some time to get the ball under control, even if it's not the greatest of passes. And again, it doesn't have to be pretty all the time. It's got to be effective, and it's got to work for the players that you've got. And that's probably one of the key things for us, is thinking about the players we've got available and how do we get the best out of them.
Yeah, that was probably like the thing I was interested in there around. Obviously, you've got real pace in your team, in particularly in Ebony Salmon, but also in a couple of other players in your attacking line. So, you know, like, how important is it for you to consider the positioning of your centre forward when there's that press that's happening from Reading? Because is it just about getting in behind really quickly and winning a foot race, or is there something different depending on different player strengths? Because I know you had in the end, you ended up having two different centre forwards playing against Reading.
Yeah, again, it comes back to your. I think it comes back to your principles of play, and then asking the players to make good decisions. So, where is the space that we're trying to exploit? And with Reading's press, it's either going to be just, you know, if you've got a back to goal 9, if you like, who can hold the ball up, the space is actually going to be just in front of those centre halves. If you can pull them right back onto halfway, they're actually going to be a little bit disconnected to the rest of the press. So there's a nice little pocket there that you might be able to get on the ball with. One of the other sort of things that we noticed was actually when they do press and they do stay connected and they go really, really high, actually there's a load of space in behind because they're well inside their own half, their attacking half. So again, you know, do you want to start to creep onto the halfway line? Even if you're not getting the ball, you're not allowing then, you know, their two centre halves to release and actually then step in and be sort of front foot and go and win the ball. So, you know, for us, you know, we had Abby Harrison up top to start with, and then she ended up bursting her ACL. So again, you know, not a great run. And then you've got to rethink your tactics, because for us, we wanted to sort of go up, back and out, or up, back and over based on Abby's strengths. And when you lose that, you then need to think again. So we rotated, you know, Ebony up there, electric pace. Actually, now we're looking to go over the top. And that means, Ebony, you've got to stay higher, stay out of the way, pin those two centre halves back and actually look to go over the top.
The whole opposition analysis piece is quite interesting as well, because if Reading had done their work on you in advance, they might have recognised that pace that you've got, and maybe their line wouldn't be as high. But I guess it's that swings and roundabouts. You kind of you can never really predict the exact shape of the opposition and their tactics. Let's move on to the next one then. Where do you see what's Reading's press like here, Tanya?
Yeah, again, you can see they've got, you know, loads of numbers around the ball. There's that release that I'm talking about there. So I think it's their fullbacks just released herself and gone to win the ball because she thinks she can, you know, arrive on first touch. This is I'm just going to pause it there. And this is the sort of space, you know, in front of, I think that might be Lauren James, just on the corner of the screen there. But the space just in front of her there, that's the space we're talking about in terms of if we're going to go up, back and through, or up, back and over, up, back and out, that's the pocket. So you've got to hold that. You've got to hold that line to be able to come into that pocket, and that's really important. But also anticipate that the two, one of the Reading centre backs is probably going to try and step in front of you there. So she goes with her there. So then it's about protect and play and see if you can get yourself out the other side, because again, one of their strengths is they get great numbers around the ball. So there's got to be space out the other side, and if you can do that effectively, you're going to get an opportunity to face forward and play.
Yeah.
Can you just pause it there for us, could you, Tanya, please, or Laura?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's like I say again, some great counter. I found this fascinating really with Reading there, where if we view back to our model, the in possession bit about creating space, I think there's a real tactical strategy there around that. They've actually done the opposite there and condensed it. So again, it's almost the thinking of a transitional element. If they don't secure it, Tanya, then they can apply that counter press straight away. So I found that quite a fascinating sort of picture. That's almost 7v7, I think. But as you've alluded to, is in your planning, where is the outlet, as you mentioned there, and where is the space? But I think it's quite a clever way of trying to minimise. There's almost players thinking about the transitional element, not looking for space, creating it, or looking for penetration at the moment.
Yeah, it's about having the belief and the patience. It's so hard when everything's going on in that zone there. Like you say, there's so many bodies in there. So if you're the one that's supposed to be providing that outlet, it's very difficult not to start to creep, to creep into that space. So it's about trusting, your players that you've got in there to do the job. And Reading, like I said, Reading are great at getting numbers around the ball. You have to match their aggression. You have to match, their tenacity. Then you have to be really clever at getting the ball out as quickly as possible, because otherwise they'll just continue to swarm around you and create opportunities for themselves.
Do you feel that
there, where sorry, Ames, just looking at sort of where I don't know if the cursor works, but essentially that area there on the left for Man United, that fullback cannot arrive on first touch there. So that's a perfect position to be in, because the player on the ball now just has to hit an area, and then from there you can start to get your head up and have a look. And we'd be wanting forward runs in that position, because again, they're quite happy to go a 2v1 or a 1v1 at the back. So it's about having that patience to sort of get yourself out of it. Sorry, Amy.
No, I was just going to make a comment around kind of you were talking about the amount of bodies that get around the ball, and do you feel like their press is predictable? In terms of, are they trying to get you to play into certain areas? What's your thoughts around that?
That's a good question. I personally, I don't know, because we tried not to sort of get ourselves in that position. I think probably the season before they liked to get us in particular, they wanted us to play into wide areas, because they probably didn't think we had the capability to then get out, which was fair enough, because we probably didn't. So we used to lock ourselves into one side, and then it suited that particular style of that compact, really narrow press. So this season we tried not to fall into that trap. So we kind of tried to play over it. And we showed a lot of clips the season before of where we got caught trying to play to a fullback or trying to play to a wide player, where actually then we couldn't get ourselves out. So for us, that might be a trend that they look at. They might see a weakness there and sort of go, right, we're going to hone in on that. Or that might be something that is more, principle or team based for them in particular, but not sure, to be honest.
It's interesting you say, Tanya, about you recognise that last season they were looking to play or force outside, having done a fair bit of analysis on Reading both this season and last season. That was definitely a trait, and for something for me that I found quite interesting last season, because they played with the diamond midfield, and when I've worked with teams as an analyst before, we played with the diamond. We tend to try and show people inside where there were bodies, but they were actually playing in a diamond formation, but forcing players outside, which I thought sort of seemed a bit different to what I'd come across before, put it that way.
Yeah, we really felt for the outside, the wide diamond players when we did that analysis as well. I was like, oh gosh, we want to be one of them having to get themselves out there. But yeah, look, again, it comes back to that physical capability. If you've got the players that can physically do that work, then great. But that is something that you need to make sure you've got the right players to do, I would say.
Okay, so just moving on now into, like, I guess you've performed this opposition analysis. You've got these ideas around how they might operate in the high press phase. So this was a bit of a weird one because there was an international break, wasn't there, as you were talking about before with Laura. So talk us through the build up, like how many players were available to you and what type of like practices were you doing? Was there like a lot of individual work, unit work? You had quite a lot of time with the players.
Yeah, look, our season in general, you know, that week was probably very indicative of what the whole season looked like, to be honest. Probably 6 players available all week. So again, you're looking at smaller stuff, stuff that's on their individual development plan that also probably links quite nicely into Reading and some of the things they're going to face. For our, you know, we had a couple of young midfielders, so getting them to work with their back to goal, with a load of pressure and maintaining possession for when they do counter press, things like that. Really important, making sure we get first contact on any of the crosses. Again, you know, set pieces are a massive strength of theirs, so trying to educate off the pitch as well on things as much as we could. And the beauty is nowadays with technology, even though it's an international break and your players aren't actually with you, once that international kind of duty is finished, everything is on Huddle and everything is available for them to view. So we make sure that in terms of the opposition analysis, the stuff they need to see, the training sessions, anything we think is vital goes on Huddle so they can access it and start to really switch their mind back to club football. In an ideal world, we're sort of split, our week's split really to an in-possession session and an out-of-possession session. And the way we frame that, obviously, is if you know, a Wednesday is us in possession, then we're looking at Reading out of possession and what are their key trends and what are their strengths, and using our own principle terminology to make sure the players understand that. And then how does that link to what we're trying to do? And then we would go out and obviously, you know, the session's framed and we would go out and look at that. So, but an international break week, you can't do that. So you're trying to cram a lot of work into a small period of time. And, you know, I think that's where consistency of message, consistency of your playing principles is really important, because what you're asking the players to do necessarily doesn't change, but where you're asking them to do it might. And so therefore you're not trying to reinvent the wheel as such. And that, I think that's, you know, that's something that's been really, really important. And look, I'd like to play a certain way 100%, but I can't do that because if I don't have the players available, I don't have players fit, I don't have, you know, maybe the attributes that I'd like at this point in time yet, because they're still developing, then I need to adjust the way I'm going to be sort of setting my team up. And international break week is always interesting because you plan for something and then 2 or 3 of them come back and go, I'm out. So, you know, you're back to the drawing board all over again.
Well, so as you're leading into, so you've got the players back then, Tanya, and as you're leading into this game that week,
yeah,
so I think this will be of real interest to the coaches, and what I see as I go around in my role around clubs is your practice design really. So you're taking into consideration what the opposition are going to bring as your starting point, as you've mentioned, the capabilities of your players and your principles of how you want to play. What's your main percentage of your actual sessions? Is it a structured in possession? Is it out, or do you prefer to work from a transitional moment in the game? You know, does it vary, or was it really specific in this particular Reading game?
I think it depends on who we play, to be honest. If we know we're not going to have a whole load of the ball, then actually our in possession session is more around that transition moment and what we look to do with it. Yeah. Reading was one of those. So again, it's about setting up something where we had the ball, you know, they've counter pressed, we've got the ball back, and then how do we release? So a lot of pattern work, a lot of work trying to get ourselves out of tight areas, which I'll be really honest with you, we were not great at. So, you know, on Wednesday when we're setting that up and I'm stood there watching it, I'm thinking, oh, this is a disaster. You know, so at that point, you know that you need to work on it more. So when you're looking at your normal model that you would, you know, your normal training week, if you like, you need to be able to adapt to that, because for, you know, at that point, our out of possession wasn't necessarily bad and not much had changed. So how much of my out of possession session do I spend reiterating the same messages over and over again when actually we're okay at that? and how much of that can I pinch back and actually really make sure that in the transition moment when we win the ball back, we can actually at least try and keep it. And I think that's where, you know, you need to be adaptable as a coach, because and that comes to knowing your own players really, and knowing what they're good at, and knowing as a group where they're at. Because for me, in possession is something that is a constant kind of area we need to develop. And so for me that week, it was about sort of pinching a little bit of that out of possession time, if you like, to really make sure that we could at least try and keep the ball a little bit more when we won it back.
Yeah, good.
Tanya, we were speaking before around your sliding scale, which is your kind of analogy of like how much you focus on you versus how much you'd focus on the opposition in your training. So can you talk us through that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, this came up because I get asked this a lot about, you know, you've got obviously the way that you want to play, and how much do you just focus on you, and how much do you focus on the opposition? And my answer to that is, I think it very much depends on what environment you're in, very much. And it's a sliding scale, because 1 week for me, you know, if we're playing a team that's in and around us, yes, you're still doing all your opposition. Like, what we do doesn't change, but the scale might slide a little bit more. Actually, we're in a position with the ball where we might be able to really hurt them. So I focus more on what we're doing, with a focus on where their threats are. But when you're playing a team that you know has probably a lot more quality, a lot more depth, a lot more kind of resources, all of those things, the scale slides back the other way. You have to think about how they're going to, you know, how you're going to set up and how you're going to keep yourself in the game. And I think for me, it's about making sure you're not too proud to admit that, because I know, you know, particularly for me at the start of the season, I was like, I want to play this way and I'm going to play this way, and that is it. There's no move, you know, you will get on board with it. Well, actually, when you have injuries and you have people not available, and you know, that scale has completely shifted, and you need to shift with it. Otherwise, you're going to get left behind and you're not going to survive. So I think it's about, again, knowing your squad, knowing what you've got to work with, knowing where they're at, because actually where you thought they were and where they are, it might be completely different. Confidence is low. You know, where are you on the table? Are you mid-table halfway through the season and you're quite comfortable and actually you can focus on you like the first season with Bristol? Or are you at the bottom and you're in a relegation fight and points are vital, and therefore you have to do everything that you need to win, and sometimes that's not pretty. So, yeah, the scale is always kind of shifting and moving for me.
So in this game, where was the scale at?
Yeah, definitely nullify Reading and look to counter and hurt them going the other way. So very much a focus on kind of, you know, what Reading were going to throw at us. Like I've said a couple of times, set pieces were a massive concern for us because we'd conceded a number of set pieces, and we needed to make sure that we didn't give away anything cheap. But in saying that, we knew we had the pace and power to hurt them going the other way. So it was about trying to keep ourselves in the game and not give away anything cheap. And then look to hurt them going the other way. So as soon as it went kind of to 3-3, that was it. Shut shop, take the point, and get back on the bus. So, yeah, I think for the Reading game, given that we probably didn't have a lot of points on the board either, for the confidence of the group, it was about making sure we did whatever we had to get the result.
Must be really tough then. Like in this case, you were looking to like nullify Reading's high press or the threats from their high press, and like in training with your player, how do you create situations with your players? You know, you talk a lot in this webinar around the individual capabilities of your players and like what they actually can and can't do at this moment in time. So how did you recreate situations where your players playing against your players were able to mimic in some ways the aggression, the physical demands of that press, the way that they swarm the ball from all directions and narrow off and all of this stuff? How did you replicate that?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of answers to that. One is throw some staff in there. That's one answer to help kind of really get that fear in. So if you've got some staff that are attacking you and pressing you, you pretty quickly because you're coaching on the run then, aren't you? You're kind of in it. But the other thing we like to do is overload. So essentially, you know, if we can't recreate necessarily the intensity of the press through the quality, it's about then adding more numbers in and trying to get the intensity that way, or the perception, that perceived perception of stress, if you like. So we'll add more numbers in. So, it's about just trying to, because it's mental more than anything. It's about knowing that you're going to be under pressure and then dealing with that pressure and being able to make a good decision under pressure. So however we need to recreate that pressure, whether that's, like I say, through, because at that point we didn't have a load of numbers either. So, the staff have to step in. And obviously when you've got your manager running at you, screaming at you to keep the ball, it's that, oh, God. So, but yeah, or we get some of the academy guys in and we really overload the numbers in that way. So we just got to be creative and think outside the box, really. I don't, and that's probably the one thing at Bristol in general that's taught me, is you've got to think outside the box. You can't sit there and go, oh, we don't have that. Well, if you don't have it, you don't have it right now. How do you get it? How do you create it? Because if you don't do that for your players and you don't replicate those pictures, they've got no chance on a Sunday, because all of a sudden they're like, oh gosh, this isn't what I planned for. Because, when Tanya was just walking at me, there was no pressure on the ball then. So yeah, trying to recreate game-like situations as much as you can is important. And sometimes that's not always easy to do.
And even like game-like, you could take that to the next level, recreating genuine representation of how tactically Reading and strategically how they set up. Like, even with the position of the back line that we've seen, and you were saying how high they squeeze and how they're okay with just coming out over quite large distances and going to press the ball if they feel like they can get there, or if they feel like they should be going to press. And I guess that's the details that you'd have to ensure your whole team of staff know about Reading, so that when they are coaching or involved as a player and coaching at the same time, they can truly represent what Reading are offering tactically.
Yeah, and I think, sometimes in that international break, it's about what you do off the pitch a little bit as well. So if you can't, for us, we'll use the Sabudio a lot and we'll set up some problems there and say, okay, well, if the centre half is this high, what would I, Ebony, what would I want you to do now? Or Abs, what would I want you to do now? And then they'll kind of fumble their way through it. I say, but why? Why are we doing that? And so therefore it's an interactive way, especially for the girls that have maybe come back from international duty, that, or you do a walk, maybe a walk throughout on the pitch, because from a physical point of view, they're not in a position to join into the session. So how do you keep them engaged and involved? Because there's no point just wiping a session off and going, well, we've only got 5, so we can't do anything. Well, there's loads you can do. You just need to think outside the box a little bit, chuck some mannequins in, again, you're going to get the picture then. So think about, again, the trade-off of where do I want some more active pressure and where do I just need to create the picture, and, those types of things. So it is trying to think outside the box. It's tiring, because sometimes it's like everywhere you turn, maybe that's not going to work, but worst case scenario, you can always go through, the clips, and you can recreate things on the whiteboard. And that's taken 2 years to get to a point where the girls will engage in that, by the way, because when I first came in, they wouldn't say boo. So, hopefully that helps with their learning, because everyone's different. Some people want to see it, some people want to walk through it. So it's trying to cater for all those, really.
That sets us up perfectly then for the last part, where Laura's, it was
almost seamless, that, wasn't it? I mean, you've touched on it in a couple of points around, I guess, the challenges that the international break brings you, and the fact that you don't have all your players with you, and also again, the challenges in this particular environment in terms of how you recreate some of those scenarios for players. So I guess my question is in terms of how you blend that on and off-field work, and what are some of the resources or methods that you go to support your coaching, but in an off-field environment?
Yeah, it's part of our it is part of our everyday process, really. Like I said earlier, I'm a visual learner, so I need to see it. So if even on a match day, if something's happening and my staff are trying to give me information, I'm like, don't talk to me, show me, because I won't process it. So it's really important that we incorporate that into our our planning and everything that we do. And the opposition analysis piece that we do, the way that template is set up, it's set up so that we can then translate that or thin it out a little bit to be able to present to the players, because it's no good having something for the staff if then the players are getting something completely opposite, because they need to see the pictures we're seeing. So that piece of work is then used to frame every single session. So the girls know, they come in, there's a meeting before we go out on the pitch, every single session, and we will go through that. We'll go through the process points and the trends based on our principles, using our language of the opposition, and then how are we going to use our principles to then break that down or exploit that, and then we go out on the pitch and we do it. And that's recorded. It goes on to Huddle. We ask the girls to go and watch it and review it. They need to, if they've got questions, they can add the shapes and all of that. I'm not a technical person, but they can add all of the bits in there. They can ask questions without having to be face to face. So it will obviously come up, and it's great in that sense, because I want them to start to think. I don't want them to just do things because we tell them to do it. I want them to grow their football intelligence, and the only way to do that is to really be a student of the game. And to be a student of the game means, all aspects of it. So, I'll throw stuff at them all the time, and I'll just sit there and say, but why? Why are we doing that? And it might be a really long pause.
And I think it's a really good point to make, because obviously, when the players cross that white line, they're the ones on the pitch, and they're the ones that are making the decisions and have to react to what's going on the pitch. And the more opportunities that we can give them both on the field and off the field to practice and develop those skills is vitally important to the success they do on the pitch. You sort of alluded it to a few minutes ago in terms of the work around the Sabutio board, and a couple of years ago the players were maybe less engaged with that or not willing to open up and talk. What's the work you've done with them to, I guess, build their confidence and expertise around the type of off-field work that you're doing, so you can have that open dialogue and get their viewpoints and opinions?
Yeah, I think it's really, as a coach, sometimes it's really easy to jump in and give them the answer. Whereas I will sit there and I will literally wait. If it's 10 minutes, I will sit there and wait. I'll be like, this is more painful for you than it is for me.
I love an uncomfortable silence. I actually enjoy that.
Yeah, and I think it's about open-ended questions and building the confidence for them to, one of the things that's really difficult, is when a player gives an answer and you think, oh, that's probably not right. It's about trying to, rejig that a little bit so that A, they've had the confidence to speak up, B, they've got some football knowledge. Maybe it's not relevant to the actual specific thing you're talking about now, but it's great that they are starting to think. So how do you make sure that they still feel confident enough to then speak up the next time? So it's constantly around reshaping and reframing maybe what they say and throwing something back at them to then get them to think. And that, it's got to the point now where the girls will actually ask questions and come up onto the board themselves and say, what happens if this happens? If they do this, what happens? And that's great, because I'll be honest, as a coach, sometimes they come up with stuff that I've not even thought about. I've not even thought about that because I'm so focused on something else. And I think, God, that's just such a great question. But then when we're giving answers, it's always based on our principles, always. So, we might be doing some video analysis and they will say, oh, Tanya, I wasn't sure if I was supposed to press there, for example. And my question to them will be, well, can you arrive on first touch? And, that's one of our sort of underlying pieces of our pressing principles. And they'll say no. And I'll say, well, then what's the answer? And they're like, I need to delay and hold my shape. Well, there you go. So there's no right or wrong answer because I just throw a question back at them. And I think that's probably been the piece where they don't feel afraid. I like to think they're not anyway, generally, to speak up, because we answer a question with a question, really.
I think it's a really important point, because often I think as coaches you forget the experience that you've got in front of you and in the room, and you're saying there around that the players are coming up with things that you haven't thought of. You think about the number of years of experience you've got in front of you as a coach when you stand in front of your players, and you add that all up, and then there's a lot of expertise to make use of there. So I guess my final questions are around that really is in terms of, I guess, how do you blend the more confident or more experienced players in your squad to help maybe some of the younger players that have maybe come up from your development centre into your first team? How do you blend the approach in terms of getting those guys to work together to, I guess, maximise some of the coaching outcomes that you're going after?
Yeah, we've got analysis groups, and obviously they're quite strategically sort of thought out. So we've got some real kind of leaders in those groups, ones that are really comfortable to sort of sit there and share their knowledge, and they're also very good at prompting other people to sort of engage in the conversation. So we've got 1 or 2 of those in each group. So rather than having them all in one area, we've spread them across. Trying to give them some responsibility, the more quieter ones, give them some responsibility that doesn't require them to stand up in front of the room, because as soon as you ask them to do that, the anxiety kicks in and they're not even listening to what you're asking them to do. So whilst I would love for everybody to get up and present and go through their clips or whatever it is, some people are just not confident, but that doesn't mean that they don't have some great input. So, and it's like anything. When I was on the A license course, I didn't want to stand up and talk in front of everyone, but I had stuff that I wanted to, input. So there's always one that's confident to do that. It's about knowing your skill set, knowing who brings what, and really using that to maximise what you're going to get out of the group. So, there's a difference between stepping outside of your comfort zone and really forcing people to do things that probably is not, going to get the best out of them. I think, again, it's a sliding scale. So we've all been there where we've pushed too far at times, but it's about knowing your players and kind of going, well, actually, if I ask her to step up now, she's not going to say anything. So let her talk in a group, let the person who's confident stand up and relay, and actually then maybe go back and check with one of the more confident ones. Oh, I did such and such. Yeah, she came up with a brilliant point around this and this. So there's still learning going on. It's just not in, right in front of you.
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah, the take home for me for that is recognising the individual needs of the players and then building what you do around them based on that.
Brilliant. Thanks, Tanya. Just going to ask you now, just to summarise. So taking it back to Reading's high press.
Yep.
Could you just summarise some messages in relation to that?
You're asking me to give away my secrets here, Amy.
You've already given them away now. So
yeah, look, I think with Reading, they're in for the last 2 seasons anyway, they've had a core group of players that they've kept together, so they're all very aware of what they're trying to do. From a physical perspective, they're capable of doing what's being asked of them. So when you're looking specifically at their high press, they're aggressive. They want to win the ball back high. They get great numbers. They're very narrow and compact. They get great numbers around the ball. So even if they don't win it the first time, they're in a position to really suffocate you. And then they look to be effective going the other way. So they're not the nicest team to play in that sense, because essentially if you get it wrong, they will hurt you. So really aggressive, really disciplined, if you like. They if one goes, they all go, and generally speaking, they're not afraid to sort of release themselves and get around the ball.
Okay, then. So for the coaches listening, I guess some things to think about would be with your own players and your own team is, why do you press in the way that you do? So when you've adopted this, say, a high pressing strategy, why do you do it in that way? I think that's probably a good question to ask yourself, in particular relating to what you've said there, Tanya, around what your players are capable of at the moment, and what capabilities you want them to be able to have moving forwards. And then also just around the when of the high press. We've alluded to it throughout, is the physical demands of that, and how realistic is it in terms of sustaining it. So picking your moments, I suppose, with the high press. And then also in relation to what's the plan once you've won it back? I think that's a big question to ask ourselves as coaches. Is great that we're in this brilliant shape. We've got in a position to win the ball back, but then what's our plan next? Thank you so much, Tanya, for joining us on today's webinar. It's been a real privilege to be able to speak to you and to hear your experiences, and thank you for sharing and opening up.
Thanks for having me. Really enjoyed it.
Thanks, Tanya.
No worries.